The porcelain cup in my hand was trembling long before I realized why. I had brewed the tea exactly the way Clara liked it, light honey, one thin slice of lemon, and carried it down the hall toward their bedroom. The carpet muffled every step, and for a second I thought how quiet this house had become. Then I heard my name. "She's still up," Clara said. Her voice was small but sharp, like a thread pulled too tight. Ethan answered. "She won't be for long." Something in his tone made me stop just before the half-closed door. Light spilled through the thin line where the door didn't meet the frame. I stood there, holding the cup between both palms. I told myself to breathe, to move, to do anything at all, but curiosity can be cruel. Keeps you still when you should run. Clara spoke again. "When the car burns, make sure the papers are ready. I want no delays this time." My fingers stiffened. I felt the heat seep through the porcelain into my skin. The words drifted through that narrow crack and lodged inside my chest. Ethan sighed. "You think I haven't thought of that? The insurance has to clear first." Insurance. I remember that word clearly, clean and cold as glass. Clara's reply came softer, almost a whisper. "Then she dies for nothing." I almost dropped the cup. The tea rippled in slow circles. A lemon seed floated like an eye watching me. Every sound in the world seemed to disappear. The hum of the refrigerator, the tick of the hallway clock, even the wind outside, all gone. There was only the small hiss of my own breath. My first thought was that I had misheard. People say things when they are angry, when life presses too close. But Clara's next sentence left no room for confusion. "As long as she's alive, we're stuck." Alive. The word sounded wrong coming from her mouth, like something unpleasant she wanted to spit out. I took one step back. The floor creaked. My heart jumped into my throat. For a terrible second I waited for the door to open, for their faces to appear and find me standing there like an eavesdropping ghost. But no one moved. Their voices kept going lower now, like a prayer set in reverse. "She can't drive that far anymore," Ethan said. "Then we make it look like she tried," Clara replied. I turned, holding my breath until my chest ached, and walked back down the hallway. The house that used to be mine no longer felt familiar. Each shadow looked sharper, each picture frame heavier. My reflection in the dark window startled me. For a heartbeat I didn't recognize that woman. Gray hair pulled back, shoulders bent, eyes wide as if she'd seen a ghost. Maybe she had. Maybe it was me. Inside my room I locked the door for the first time since moving here. The click of the lock sounded final, like a tiny verdict. The cup still trembled in my hand. I set it down on the nightstand, watched the steam fade into the dark, and listened. The muffled voices down the hall turned into laughter, soft, controlled, rehearsed. They were planning my death. Not in a rage, not in a moment of madness, but calmly, like accountants balancing a ledger. I sat on the edge of the bed, the way I used to sit beside students who had done something wrong but didn't yet know how serious it was. My hands rested on my knees. The air smelled faintly of lemon and dust. Somewhere a pipe rattled inside the wall. I counted the beats of my heart until they slowed. After my husband died 3 years ago, I had lasted exactly 4 months alone in our little cottage near the coast. The silence was too large. Every cup in the cabinet, every coat on the hook, reminded me that the other half of every sentence was missing. When Ethan suggested I move in with him and Clara, I told myself it was time to stop being stubborn. He said, "It'll be easier, Mom. No more bills, no more long drives. You'll be with family." Family. That word used to mean warmth. Now it felt like a cage built from polite words. I told myself they were just stressed, that young couples have their ways. But the signs were there. My things boxed up for space. My favorite chair gone from the living room. Even the piano I had loved for years ended up in the garage. "Too bulky," Clara said. First I didn't argue. Grief makes you quiet. It teaches you how to disappear without anyone asking where you went. Now, sitting here, I realized I had vanished long ago, and they hadn't even noticed. A gust of wind hit the window pane, followed by the soft crack of branches outside. The sea was somewhere beyond that darkness, breathing slow and deep. I used to love its sound. Tonight it felt like it was counting down. I rose and looked around my room. It was neat, too neat, the way guest rooms are in hotels, impersonal, temporary. The wallpaper peeled a little near the lamp. I traced the edge with my finger and thought of the classroom where I once taught literature. I used to tell my students that every story begins with a moment someone stops pretending. Maybe this was mine. I went to the dresser and opened the top drawer. Inside were folded blouses, a small tin box of keepsakes, a photograph of Ethan at 10 years old holding a kite. His smile in that picture was real. I pressed my thumb against it until the glass warmed. What had happened to that boy? The one who cried when his fish died, who saved pennies to buy me a Mother's Day card. How does that kind of love rot into calculation? Down the hallway I heard the bedroom door close. The silence after that was worse than their words. It stretched, thick and heavy, until I could hear my own heartbeat again. I sat back down and whispered into the empty room. You should have known better, Zuri. The name sounded strange in the dark, like calling out to a stranger. My eyes went to the clock on the wall. It was past midnight. The hands moved steadily, calm as a pulse that isn't mine. I watched them circle once, twice. The night refused to end. When the first light began to thin the edges of the curtains, I was still awake. My body ached but my mind was clear. They thought I would die quietly. They thought I would never notice. I poured the cold tea into the sink, washed the cup, and placed it back in the cupboard as if nothing had happened. Then I looked at my reflection in the window again. The woman staring back wasn't broken. She looked older, yes, but also sharper, as if something long asleep had finally opened its eyes. I hear you, I said softly. Every word. And for the first time in months I felt alive. Morning came the way guilt comes, quietly but impossible to ignore. I sat at the kitchen table long before anyone else woke, tracing the pattern on the wood with my fingertip. The smell of coffee drifted from the machine, but I did not touch it. My reflection shimmered faintly in the window above the sink, the glass fogged by the chill air outside. For a moment I could almost believe nothing had changed. Then Clara walked in. Her hair was tied up in a perfect knot, and she smiled the way people do when they have already decided something. Up early again? She said, reaching past me for a mug. You really should sleep more. It's not healthy at your age. My age? She always said it like a diagnosis. I smiled back. I'll try. My voice sounded calm, almost pleasant. Inside my pulse ticked like a hidden clock. She poured herself coffee, adding sugar with small precise movements. Ethan appeared next, half awake, scrolling through his phone. He didn't look at me. He rarely did anymore. I watched them in silence, these two people I once believed were my family. From the way they moved, you'd think they were rehearsing a scene from a domestic commercial, smiling, well-dressed, gentle. No one would guess the night before. Clara turned suddenly. I made you some oatmeal, Mom. You should eat before it gets cold. The bowl was waiting at the far end of the table, separate from theirs. It looked pale and lumpy. I forced a small nod. Thank you. I sat and lifted the spoon. The oatmeal smelled faintly metallic. I tasted one small bite. Too sweet. My stomach twisted. She watched me, waiting. I smiled again, the way teachers smile when they pretend not to notice a lie. Lovely, I said. When she left the room, I poured the rest into the sink and rinsed it away. The steam rose like a sigh. The day unfolded with the same cold efficiency. Ethan left for work. Clara began her chores, and I wandered through the house like a ghost who refused to vanish. I touched the back of the couch, the edge of the bookshelf, the photo frames that no longer held pictures of me. Every trace of my life here had been wiped clean. Only the smell of lemon polish remained. In the living room, the piano still sat under its heavy cover. I ran my fingers along the cloth. Beneath it I could almost feel the keys waiting, silent, patient. I used to play every Sunday morning, small hymns that filled the house with light. Clara once said it made her anxious. Too sentimental. After that I stopped. I lifted the cover halfway and pressed one key. The sound was thin but pure. It vibrated through my fingers, a small reminder that something in this house could still respond to touch. Then I closed it again. Outside, the wind carried the smell of salt and pine. The ocean wasn't far. I opened the window just enough to breathe it in. That scent had always calmed me, even as a girl growing up in a town where the sea swallowed more names than it returned. My mother used to say that the ocean keeps secrets better than people. She was right. The sound of Clara's heels broke the thought. She stood in the doorway, her arms crossed. It's chilly. You'll catch a cold. I closed the window without a word. After lunch I went to the garden. The roses had nearly died, their stems blackened by salt air. I pruned them slowly, careful with each thorn. When I was teaching, I used to tell my students that tending something fragile teaches you patience. Now I understood it teaches you control. You decide which part survives. While cutting a dead branch, I noticed the car parked by the garage. A silver SUV, newly washed, sunlight sliding over its surface. I hadn't seen it yesterday. The sight of it sent a shiver through me, but I forced myself to keep pruning. Clara's voice drifted from the porch. Do you like it? Ethan thought you could use something safer than that old sedan. I looked up, shielding my eyes. It's lovely. Good, she said, her smile too wide. We'll take you for a ride this weekend. I nodded, pretending to admire the shine. Inside, a cold understanding settled deeper. The bridge. The fire. The accident. The plan already had its stage. That evening, while setting the table, I found the smallest detail waiting for me. A bottle of new pills by my plate. The label read Sleep Aid, take 2 before bed. My name printed neatly below. I had never seen that pharmacy before. Clara noticed me reading it. The doctor recommended these, she said. You've been restless lately. I nodded again, too tired to argue. After dinner, I carried the bottle to my room and placed it beside the lamp. I sat there for a long time, staring at the blue tablets inside. Each one smooth as a promise. When I turned the label toward the light, the reflection caught the edge of my wedding ring, still on my hand after all these years. I wondered what my husband would have said if he were here. Probably nothing at first. He was a quiet man. He would have waited until I looked at him, then said something simple and steady like, "You already know what to do." I did know. I turned off the lamp and lay in the dark. The house made its nightly noises, the whisper of pipes, the shift of wind in the eaves, the occasional footstep that might have been imagination. I kept my breathing slow, measured, pretending to sleep. From somewhere down the hallway came the faint creak of their door, then murmurs too soft to understand. I closed my eyes and pictured the ocean again. Its endless patience, its quiet strength. They believed I was fragile. They mistook silence for surrender. But silence has teeth. And I was done pretending to be harmless. Breakfast was a ceremony of silence. The sunlight slid across the kitchen tiles like an uninvited guest, pale and cold. I sat at the end of the long table while Clara arranged plates with the precision of a surgeon. Ethan scrolled through his phone, spooning cereal without ever lifting his eyes. Between us lay a bowl of strawberries no one touched. "Did you sleep well, Mom?" Clara asked finally. Her smile was perfect, stretched just enough to show civility, not warmth. "As well as anyone can," I said. Ethan grunted something that could have been a laugh. Clara poured orange juice, filling her glass first. When she reached for mine, her hand hesitated halfway, as if remembering she did not need to be kind, and then continued. The juice overflowed a little, running down the side of the glass. She didn't wipe it. She just turned away. The silence after that had a shape, a weight. I could almost see it hovering over the table. I forced myself to take a bite of toast. It tasted of cardboard and something bitter. I looked at them, 2 strangers wearing the faces of people I once loved, and wondered if either of them remembered how this house used to sound. When Ethan was 10, breakfast meant chaos. Burnt pancakes. His laughter echoing off the walls. My husband teasing that I was the worst cook in Maine. We would eat on the porch barefoot, while the radio hummed old jazz. Now the porch was closed off, the radio gone, and laughter had become an endangered species. "Do you need anything from the store?" I asked. My voice felt like a visitor in that room. "No, Mom," Ethan said without looking up. "We're fine. We're fine. You're not together. Just we, and I was not part of it." After breakfast, Clara cleared only their plates. Mine stayed. I sat there staring at the crumbs until she sighed dramatically, as if my existence were a stain on her schedule. "Let me help," I said, standing. She turned, the smile gone. "You'll just slow me down." I froze, spoon still in my hand. Her words were clean and cruel, the kind that don't leave bruises but cut anyway. I placed the spoon in the sink and left the kitchen. The hallway smelled of lemon polish and neglect. Every photo on the wall had been rearranged. The ones of Ethan's childhood were gone. In their place hung landscapes, mountains, trees, places we'd never been. I paused in front of the one near the stairs, a picture of a bridge stretching across gray water. The resemblance was uncanny. The bridge again. I touched the frame lightly. The glass was cold. Beneath my fingertips I felt something tremble. Not the frame, not me, but the space between. A warning, maybe. My room was at the far end of the hall, the smallest in the house. When I first moved in, Clara had said it was cozy. Now I saw it for what it was. A box with one window facing the neighbor's fence. The wallpaper had a faint pattern of leaves, faded where sunlight used to reach. On the dresser sat the bottle of blue pills. I hadn't thrown them away yet. I kept them where I could see them, a reminder of how far their kindness extended. I opened the window. The air outside was damp, salted from the sea. Somewhere a gull screamed, sharp and lonely. The sound slipped into the room like a truth I could not ignore. For a moment I thought about walking out the front door, suitcase in hand, finding some small apartment back near the coast. But I knew better. The house deed was already in Ethan's name. The car too. My bank account shared. Every thread of my life was tied neatly into their hands. Escape wasn't a door anymore. It would have to be a plan. A soft knock pulled me from my thoughts. Clara stood there holding a folded blanket. "You left this in the dryer." "Thank you," I said. She didn't hand it to me. She placed it on the bed, smoothed it once, then looked around my room as if inspecting it for flaws. "You should keep things tidy," she said. "It helps you think clearly." "I try." She smiled again, eyes empty. "Good. Routine keeps the mind steady, especially at your age." She left before I could answer. I waited until her footsteps faded down the hall, then unfolded the blanket. A faint scent of detergent and something else clung to it, bleach. My fingers brushed against a small corner tag that read property of St. Matthew's Senior Home. I stared at it, trying to remember if any of my things ever came from a place like that. They didn't. So whose blanket was this really? Later, while dusting the bookshelf in the living room, I overheard Clara on the phone. Her tone was syrupy, pleasant, the kind she reserved for strangers. "Yes, she's still with us," she said, laughing softly. No, not yet. Soon though. You know how these things go." A pause. Then, "Yes, everything's arranged. The policy's active." I stopped dusting. The feather brush hung midair. Her back was turned, the afternoon light catching her profile like a painting of patience. She ended the call with a cheerful goodbye, then turned to see me standing there. "Talking to the garden service," she said easily. "We're adding a few lilies." "Lilies? Funeral flowers?" I nodded. "They'll look nice." She smiled as if we were partners in the same lie. That night, I wrote a note in the small leather journal I kept hidden behind the dresser mirror. I had not written in months. The page smelled faintly of dust and ink. They are planning something. The bridge keeps returning. The car. The policy. I have to listen carefully. The house forgets me, but I will not forget myself. When I closed the book, my hand was steady. I lay down, facing the ceiling where a faint crack ran like a map across the plaster. I followed its crooked path until sleep took me for a while. Dreams came in fragments. The sound of waves, a door closing, a woman's laughter echoing inside a metal shell. I woke before dawn, heart racing, mouth dry. Somewhere in the distance, a car engine turned over and died. The house was still, pretending innocence again. But I had seen its true face now, and I wasn't going to let it forget me so easily. The next day began with the sound of a leaf blower and the scent of cut grass. I stood by the kitchen sink rinsing a single cup as if it were a rare object. Outside the window, the gardener moved along the edge of the yard, his boots leaving dull tracks in the damp soil. He waved when he saw me. I lifted my hand and he nodded once before turning away. People in uniforms always move with purpose. It comforts those who watch. Clara came in carrying a stack of folded towels. She placed them on the counter as if she were preparing a display for a shop. Her smile was quick and perfectly arranged. "Ethan will drive you to the library this afternoon," she said. "They have a senior program. It will be good for you." "For me. Not with me." "I can walk," I said. Her eyes sharpened. "The library is across town. The bridge is narrow. Walking is not safe." She poured herself water, then added 2 ice cubes with the smallest clink. "Besides, it would be nice to try the new SUV. I nodded, as if the thought pleased me. The cup in my hand felt heavier than it should. When she left, I dried the sink with a clean towel and put the cup back on its shelf. It struck me how carefully I treated small things now. There was a time when I would have left the cup to drip dry and gone to play the piano, windows open, sea wind coming through. Careless joy is something you notice only after it goes missing. By noon, Ethan called to say he was delayed. The plan changed with a gentle tap of his thumb on a screen. Clara appeared at my door with a fixed expression. "I can take you instead," she said. "It will be a nice drive." I grabbed my bag and followed her outside. The silver SUV gleamed. The door opened with a soft sound that felt too smooth to be real. I settled into the seat as if it were a waiting mouth. The air smelled new. Too new. Clara adjusted the mirror, then glanced at me with that bright attention she saves for strangers she wants to impress. The engine started. We rolled down the street past trimmed hedges and shuttered windows. People love tidy neighborhoods because they can pretend danger is a rumor. The waterfront came into view as we turned toward the main road. The water was the color of slate, calm and heavy. In the distance, the bridge lifted like a question. Clara spoke to fill the quiet. "There is a fall festival next month. Maybe you could volunteer at the craft table. Simple tasks are good for focus." I watched the bridge grow larger. "I can focus," I said. "Of course," she answered, as if agreeing with a child. "But keeping busy helps. I spoke to the clinic about your sleep. They said you can increase the dose if you want." "Which clinic?" "A small one near the lighthouse," she said, eyes still on the road. "They are discreet." I looked out the window. The lighthouse stood like a finger raised against the sky. I had never been to any clinic near it. I did not argue. I wanted her to keep talking. People reveal themselves when they think you are safe to speak around. We reached the town center and passed the bakery that still smells like butter and sugar from my first years here. A woman in a green coat crossed the street, then stopped, surprised. "Zuri," she called. "Is that you?" Clara slowed and I recognized the voice. Mrs. Kemp from the old book club. Her hair was whiter, her eyes the same kind blue. I opened the door before the car had fully stopped. She met me on the curb and held my hands in both of hers. "You look well," she said. "We have not seen you at the readings." I smiled at the safety of her touch. "I plan to come back." Clara waited in the car, window down, voice pleasant. "We are running late for the library. Another time." Mrs. Kemp's mouth tightened. That expression, that small vertical line between her eyebrows, unlocked a memory of the night we stayed late after a meeting to argue about a poem. She could be stern when something mattered. She leaned closer. "Are you all right, dear?" "Of course," I said. The old habit of self-protection rose without effort. But then she lowered her voice. "Clara stopped by my porch last week. She said you forget things. She said you wander." Heat pricked my face. For a moment it felt like all the air had been drawn out of town and kept in Clara's pocket. "I do not wander," I said. "I did not believe it," Mrs. Kemp whispered. "But I wanted to ask." I squeezed her hands. "Thank you." Clara tapped the horn lightly, a polite reminder that scenes should end on schedule. I stepped back into the car and closed the door with care. We drove away. I did not look back. I did not need to. I knew what expression sat on Mrs. Kemp's face because I had seen it in my own mirror. At the library, I pretended to browse while Clara pretended to read. She stood near the entrance, phone in hand, a sentinel for appearances. I walked the aisles and ran my fingers over the spines like a pianist who cannot play. I pulled a book of poems and sat by a window where the light came down in quiet squares. A line on the page caught me. The poem said that the opposite of fire is not water. It is time. I copied the line onto a scrap of paper and tucked it into my bag. If the opposite of fire is time, then my work was to slow everything down until the match in their hand went cold. On the drive home, Clara hummed a tune that did not exist. At a red light, she turned to me. "You have always been a little fragile," she said, as if stating the weather. "No shame in that. Families take care of fragile things." "I am not fragile," I said. The light turned green and she smiled at the road. "Of course." Back at the house, I excused myself to the garden. The wind had shifted and brought the scent of the tide. I knelt by the roses and cleared the soil around their bases. The ground gave way grudgingly. If roses could speak, they would say that sweetness requires defense. Footsteps crunched on gravel. The gardener stood a few feet away, holding a small pair of clippers. He cleared his throat. "Miss Horton, the lady asked me to remove the bench." "The bench by the hydrangeas," he said when I did not answer. "That bench has been there since Ethan was little," I said. He looked apologetic but not surprised. "She said it collects leaves." I nodded. "Leave it today. If she wants it gone tomorrow, she can lift it herself." He almost smiled. "Yes, ma'am." After he left, I sat on the bench and closed my eyes. My body felt the ache that comes when a person carries more than her shape suggests. A small thud sounded from somewhere inside the house, then the sharp slide of a drawer. The day moved forward like a slow tide, drawing things away I could not name. In the late afternoon, Clara called me to the den. Papers were arranged on the coffee table. Her voice wore a sweater. "House insurance update," she said. "And a couple of forms for the car." I sat. She handed me a pen with a gold nib and folded my hand around it. I could feel the land of intention she wanted me to enter. "This is only to streamline things," she said. "You hate paperwork anyway." She held the papers just so that only the line for signatures was clearly visible. I tilted the pages toward the light. Words swam. My eyes are not what they were, but they are not useless. I set the pen down. "I will read them later," I said. Her smile did not move, but something in her eyes tightened, quick as a string pulled hard. "It would be good to finish now." "Later," I repeated. "I have a headache." The smile remained in place. "Perhaps more sleep will help." I stood and she did not stop me. In the hallway, I touched the wall like a blind person mapping a room. A memory rose so fast it made me dizzy. Years ago, my students would bring me papers and ask where to place their names. Some would hope I would not read the rest, that the signature could do their work for them. I always told them that a name means nothing when it is separated from truth. In my room, I closed the door and sat at the small desk where I kept my old address book. The leather was worn and soft under my fingers. I slid it open, scanning names long asleep in the past. Near the middle of the book, under a fold where the spine had cracked, was a number I had not dialed in years. Evelyn Walsh. The line wavered because my eyes were wet. I did not call. Not yet. To call is to admit the world has tilted and will not right itself on its own. I needed a day to gather the loose ends of my courage. I turned to my journal and wrote again. Clara spoke to the neighbors. She is writing me out of myself. She is planting a story where I am forgetful and lost. This is how a person disappears in plain sight. Not with ropes, not with locks, but with whispers that sound like concern. When I finished the entry, I heard a knock on the front door. 2 quick taps, then a pause. The rhythm of someone who hopes to be invited but will not insist. I stepped into the hall. Clara had already reached the door. She opened it a narrow distance. A woman stood there holding a paper bag from the bakery. Mrs. Kemp again, cheeks pink from the wind. "I brought some bread," she said. "Thought you might like it." Clara thanked her sweetly and kept the door as a barrier. "That is very kind. She is resting now." "Oh," Mrs. Kemp said, peering past her shoulder. "I will not keep her. Just a hello." "I am afraid today is not good," Clara answered, voice soft as feathers. "She has been confused since morning. She thinks her husband is still alive. You know how it goes." The bag rustled in Mrs. Kemp's arms. "I see," she said. Her face shifted to that careful sympathy people use when they want to be kind without getting involved. "Give her my love." "I will," Clara said, closing the door with care. She carried the bread to the kitchen. I stepped back before she saw me and returned to my room where the air felt safer. I sat for a long time without moving. Then I took the pills from the bedside table, unscrewed the lid, and counted them one by one. I wrote the number in my journal, then put the bottle back and lined it up with the edge of the lamp. If someone altered it, I would know. At dinner, Ethan spoke about a new project at work. Clara spoke about lilies and contractors and a trip she wanted to take before winter. I ate slowly, making small sounds of approval at the right moments. When the meal ended, Clara placed a single slice of bread on a plate in front of me. "From a friend," she said. "Be careful. It is very soft." I tasted it and thought of the bakery's warm air, and the small bell above the door. I wished I had handed the bread back across the threshold and said the words that wanted to come. She is not confused. She is being erased. Instead, I swallowed and smiled. Some truths live longer when you keep them to yourself a little while. That night I opened the window and let the sea come in. Somewhere in the distance a bell buoy sounded. The rhythm was slow and patient. I packed a small cloth bag with my journal, the address book, a photograph and a change of clothes. Then I unpacked it and returned everything to its place. Leaving without proof would only make their story stronger. I lay down fully dressed and kept my shoes by the bed. In the dark, the house breathed the quiet breath of a creature that pretends to sleep while watching. I matched my own breathing to it, slow for slow, until my heart stopped shouting and began to listen again. Tomorrow I would make a call. Tomorrow the erasure would meet resistance. For now I held one thought and warmed my hands around it like a cup. They want a fire. Let them wait. I will give them time instead. And time, if you know how to use it, can burn hotter than anything else. The car waited in the driveway like something alive. Sunlight struck its silver skin and scattered across the garage wall in broken pieces. I stood on the porch steps, hands tucked into my sweater sleeves, pretending to be surprised. Ethan dangled the key fob between two fingers. "For you," he said. "You need independence, Mom. You always loved driving." Clara stood beside him, her smile polished to perfection. "It is safer than that old sedan. Easier on your back." The words tasted rehearsed. Still, I reached out and let the key rest in my palm. It was small and warm from his hand, a smooth oval with a red button that glowed faintly. "It is beautiful," I said. My voice carried a kind of hollow sincerity that even I could hear. Clara stepped closer and opened the driver's door for me. The interior smelled of new leather, that sterile sweetness that never belongs to real life. "Go on," she said. "Sit inside. See how it feels." I slid into the seat. The cabin swallowed me in silence. The dashboard shone like black glass. My reflection hovered faintly in it. Older, thinner, eyes tracing every detail. A small folded blanket lay on the back seat. I reached to touch it. The fabric was soft and new and used. "Thought of everything," Ethan said, leaning on the door. "You might want to keep extra water and snacks in the glove box. You know, in case you get stuck somewhere." I smiled up at him. Always prepared. The phrase meant something else to me now. When they turned away to admire their generosity, I looked down at the steering wheel. My fingers brushed a thin seam near the ignition. Perfect stitching. Too perfect. I imagined wires running underneath like veins waiting for a pulse. Clara's perfume drifted through the open door. Vanilla and something sharp underneath. "We added you to the insurance," she said casually. "Just standard procedure. Paperwork should arrive next week." Insurance. The word clung to the air like smoke. "Thank you," I said. "You think of everything." She laughed, light and tinkling, the sound people make when they think they are untouchable. When I stepped out, the sunlight hit my eyes hard. For a moment everything blurred. I stood there, the key heavy in my hand, and thought of my husband's old truck. The one he drove until it coughed its last breath on the coastal road. It smelled of salt and tobacco and music. This new car smelled like endings dressed as beginnings. Inside the house, I placed the key on the table beside the phone. It lay there like a small animal pretending to sleep. Clara followed me in. "We can take it out tomorrow," she said. "Just a little drive. Maybe across the bridge. The view is lovely in the morning." "The bridge again?" "Always the bridge." I nodded. "That sounds nice." When she left, I stood staring at the key until the light changed and the house grew dim around it. That evening Ethan poured wine at dinner, a rare gesture. "To new chapters," he said, lifting his glass. Clara's eyes glinted. "To peace of mind." I raised my water. "To safety," I said. The word felt heavy, almost sarcastic. They talked about the weather, about Clara's plans to renovate the guest bathroom, about nothing that mattered. I let their voices blend into background noise while my mind replayed the image of the car. The shine, the seam, the soft blanket folded like an offering. Later, when they moved to the couch to watch television, I excused myself. My room was cool and smelled faintly of the sea through the open window. I sat at my desk and opened my journal. "They gave me the car today. Said it is for my independence. They keep saying that word as if freedom is something they can gift me. But a cage made of glass is still a cage. The bridge again. Always the bridge. I closed the book and listened. The house made its usual noises. Footsteps, water running, a drawer sliding shut. Then Clara's voice, low and deliberate. Do you think she suspects? Ethan's reply came muffled. She is harmless. Old people imagine things. Let her enjoy the car. Their laughter followed, soft and satisfied. I sat very still. Not frightened. Not yet. Just awake in a way I hadn't been in years. The sound of the ocean drifted in, steady and slow, like an old friend reminding me that tides always turn. Tomorrow they would ask me to drive. Tomorrow the play would begin. And I would play my part exactly as written, until I was ready to change the ending. Morning arrived wrapped in mist. The world outside the window looked half erased, as if the ocean had decided to borrow the sky's color for a while. I stood by the glass holding the key fob between my fingers. When I pressed the red button, a faint click echoed from the driveway below. The car woke obediently, its lights blinking twice like a creature acknowledging its owner. Clara's voice came from the hallway. All set for your drive, Mom? She appeared in the doorway wearing sunglasses, even though the sun hadn't yet broken through. Her tone was soft, but it had the precision of a command. Ethan followed, coffee in one hand, car papers in the other. He looked half bored, half distracted, like someone who has already skipped ahead to the final page of the story. Yes, I said. I thought I'd drive to the farmer's market. Clara smiled. Perfect. Take the scenic route. Across the bridge. The air will do you good. That bridge again. The word bridge had become a spell in her mouth, sweet and poisonous. Ethan handed me the papers. Keep these in the glove compartment, he said. Insurance stuff. And the registration. I looked at the neat folder in his hand and then at his face. You trust me with all this? He laughed. Your family. Family. A word that once meant warmth now felt like frost on glass. They walked me to the porch as if escorting a guest. I slid into the driver's seat, adjusted the mirror, and looked at them standing together in the morning light. Clara waved. Ethan placed a hand on her shoulder, and I saw his thumb move in slow circles against the fabric of her blouse, a gesture that might have looked affectionate to anyone else. To me it looked like control. The engine hummed when I turned the key. The sound was smooth, perfect, untrustworthy. I reversed slowly, watching the house shrink in the mirror, then rolled toward the street. At the end of the block I stopped and breathed. The steering wheel felt like a pulse beneath my hands. The air vents whispered. I pressed a few buttons out of curiosity. The screen lit up bright and blue. A map appeared showing my route to the bridge. It was already saved as Home View. I had never entered that name. I turned left instead of right. The system's voice asked if I wanted to reroute. I said no. The voice said okay, and went quiet. I parked near the bakery instead. The smell of bread welcomed me like a promise that the world was still ordinary somewhere. Mrs. Kemp was there again, arranging loaves on a tray. When she saw me, she came from behind the counter and hugged me quickly, as if afraid someone would scold her for it. You look tired, she said. Are they treating you all right? I hesitated. There were words sitting behind my tongue. Truth sharp enough to cut through everything, but I couldn't release them yet. They worry too much, I said. That's all. She looked at me long and hard. You can come here anytime. My son can drive you if you need. Thank you, I whispered. She wrapped a small loaf in paper and pressed it into my hand. This one's on me. When I stepped back into the air, the smell of yeast clung to my coat. I glanced at the SUV parked by the curb. It looked perfectly ordinary. Too ordinary. The kind of thing no one questions until it is too late. I drove home the long way, avoiding the bridge entirely. The car purred beneath me, obedient, patient. I tested the brakes, the wipers, the radio. Everything worked flawlessly. Still, the perfection felt wrong. Machines have character. This one had calculation. By evening, Ethan returned early from work. He found me in the living room reading. You didn't cross the bridge? He asked casually. I preferred the coast road, I said. The fog was lovely. He nodded, but I could see a small disappointment flicker in his expression. We can go together next time. Maybe tomorrow. Clara entered carrying wine. Tomorrow's good. The weather report says clear skies. I smiled. Tomorrow then. Their relief was almost invisible, but I saw it. The small exhale they shared. The glance that lasted a fraction too long. After dinner I pretended to take my pills. I let them dissolve in the sink, their blue color bleeding into the drain. Then I sat by my window and wrote. They want it soon. They think I am predictable. They think fear makes a person slow. They are wrong. Fear sharpens things. It teaches you the difference between what can kill you and what cannot. I closed the notebook and looked out at the sea. Somewhere a ship horn sounded. A deep, patient note that rolled through the mist. I imagined it calling for someone who had not yet realized they were lost. The next morning would be bright, they said. Perfect for a drive. I could almost see it already. The silver SUV, the clean line of the bridge, the blue sky above. But they had forgotten something. They had forgotten that I used to teach my students how to read stories backward. Tomorrow I would let their story begin exactly the way they planned. I would sit in the driver's seat, start the engine and smile for them. And then quietly I would start rewriting the ending. The house emptied itself at 9:30. Clara left first with a list in her hand, the kind of list that makes some people feel important. Ethan followed a few minutes later, calling out that he would be home by lunch. The garage door growled, the SUV reversed into the light, and then the street swallowed the sound of their leaving. The silence that followed had a clean edge. I waited by the kitchen sink and counted to 300 the way I used to count with children who needed the comfort of numbers. When I turned, the house seemed to look back. Rooms that ignored me every day now watched me from the corners. I took a deep breath and began to move. Not fast. Not clumsy. A woman straightening the place where she lives is no crime. I started in the hallway table where Clara kept mail. A neat stack, wrapped with an elastic band. Bills on top, charity envelopes at the bottom. I loosened the band and flipped through carefully. Bank statements in Ethan's name. A glossy brochure for a resort with white sand and blue water. At the very bottom, an envelope addressed to me but forwarded to this address already opened. Inside was a letter from my old utility company, thanking me for closing the account. Someone had written paid in a smooth, unfamiliar hand. I slid it back, replaced the elastic, and wiped the table with my palm so the dust settled evenly again. The study door stuck halfway, as if reluctant to let me in. I eased it open and stood on the threshold. It smelled like new carpet and old printer ink. The desk was too large for the room. 2 chairs faced each other like polite enemies. On the wall, a framed photograph of a city skyline. All glass and ambition. I smiled without mirth. Ethan had never liked cities. Cities liked him. I began with the top drawers. Pens arranged by color. Paper clips. A small wooden box of business cards. Second drawer, folders with labels that sounded grown. Taxes, renovation, vehicle. I opened vehicle and found a clean set of copies. Title, registration, maintenance schedule. At the back, a slip of paper with a string of numbers and the word PIN. I wrote it down on the inside of my wrist in tiny letters and closed the folder exactly as I found it. The bottom drawer stuck. I pulled it gently and felt the catch give. Inside, stacks of old magazines hid a gap along the side panel. There, pressed into the space, sat a brown accordion folder. It had no label. The paper edges were softened by handling that pretended not to be handling. I slid it free and held it like a small living thing. Back in my room, I locked the door and sat on the bed. The folder lay on my lap. I listened for the house. Nothing. Just the faint drum of the ocean under everything. I opened the flap. My full name looked up at me. Not the shorthand my husband used to write on notes, not the teacher name children learned to loop on birthday cards. My legal name. Printed in a cold, generous font. Beneath it, a policy number. Beneath that, a phrase that sat in the room like a stranger who knows you but you do not know them. Life insurance. The amount was written out in numbers and in words, as if the writer wished to admire it from every angle. $5 million. I felt the air leave my lungs and return. Leave again. Return again. The body learns things quickly when it must. I read the next page. It said beneficiary. It said Ethan Horton. It said emergency contact and named Clara. There was a line where a pen had dragged the story into lying. My signature. The letters resembled mine the way a mask resembles a face. The curve of the R was too proud. The tail of the N cut to a sharp end where mine always softened. Anyone else would have called it mine. I would not. I traced the forgery with a fingertip and then pulled my hand back as if I had touched something hot. Sudden tears pricked my eyes, not for the signature, but for the hours someone spent practicing to get this wrong so exactly. I turned the pages. Photocopies of emails with an agent in a different state. My name described as an elderly dependent. Questions about accidental death. Questions about fire caused by vehicle malfunction and whether the clause was generous. A note in Ethan's voice, too tidy to be his but clearly corrected by Clara, asking for discretion because stress is unkind to older minds. I could hear him saying it the way he used to say Mom needs to rest when I stayed up grading papers. The same word rest moved to a new task. A small receipt fluttered from the back when I lifted the last page. It was for a device whose name meant nothing to me until I read the line below it. Ignition relay timer. Purchased through a supplier with a plain name and sent to our home. The order confirmation listed a contact email that ended with Clara's maiden name. I held the paper to the light and watched the thin numbers glow. I closed my eyes and breathed until the swirl behind my eyelids steadied. When I opened them, the papers were still there. The life I had built was not. A pocket at the back of the folder held one more sheet. A draft of a letter. Written in first person as if I had spoken. It thanked Ethan and Clara for a gift of a new car that encouraged my independence. It stated that I had asked Clara to handle my estate because she was organized. It used the kind of gentle words I once used to soothe parents during difficult conferences. It hurt more than the forged signature. To be spoken for is a theft that does not leave fingerprints. I placed everything back in order, photographed each page with my old phone, and then photographed them again with the lamp angled differently so shadows would not lie later. I slipped the phone beneath the lining of my purse and listened again. The house still breathed its slow, careful breath. I pressed the folder closed and sat very still. The quiet in the room was not the quiet before a storm. It was the quiet of a verdict already delivered. On the dresser, the bottle of pills stared at me with its clean white label. I lifted it, angled it toward the window, and saw my face reflected in the plastic like a warning. I opened the cap and poured 2 tablets into my palm. Blue coins. I placed them back, closed the lid, and lined it exactly with the lamp base the way I had done last night. I would know if it moved. A memory rose with the clarity of a bell. In my classroom, I once told a girl who was afraid to read her poem out loud that courage is a small room inside you where you can close the door and think. This now was that room. I sat in it. I thought. When I stood, I knew what to do first. I took my address book from the drawer. The leather was cracked along the spine where the most used names had bent it. I found the page with E. There she was. Evelyn Walsh. The friend from before marriage, before teaching, before we learned which parts of ourselves we could keep and which were rented to time. We had exchanged Christmas cards each year even when the space between us became a map. I pressed my thumb against the numbers as if the imprint could travel. Not yet, I told myself. Timing is also a door. I returned the folder to the study, to its gap behind the magazines, to the bottom drawer that resisted as if it had thoughts. I slid the drawer shut and then opened it a fraction and closed it again, setting the air inside to the same pressure it knew before me. On the desk, I moved a pen 1 inch to the left and then moved it back to the exact shadow mark where it had rested. If they came home early, I did not want the room to speak my name. In the kitchen, I wiped the counter although it was clean, left a glass upside down to dry where Clara always leaves glasses, and set the dish towel to hang with the frayed edge pointing right. She notices small wrongness. I gave her none. Then I walked out to the yard. The sky had opened its color by then. The wind lifted the corner of the tarp that covered the old grill. A gull circled once and let out a cry that sounded like a question. I sat on the bench that the gardener had been told to remove and rested my hands on my knees. $5 million. A bridge. A car. A fire that would never belong to me. I listened to the ocean and made a promise, not the kind that binds lovers, but the kind that holds bones together when everything else fails. I would not die in a story someone else had drafted for convenience. The front gate clicked. My head turned before I told it to. A neighbor walked past with a dog that did not pull on its leash. She raised a hand and I raised mine. To anyone watching, I was an older woman enjoying the morning. To me, I was a witness who had finally found the page where the plot confessed itself. I went inside and picked up the phone. My finger hovered over the numbers for a long breath and then began to dial. Evelyn, I said when she answered on the second ring. It is Zuri. I need you to listen. Please do not interrupt. Her voice softened in a way I had not heard since we were 20. I am here. So I told her what the house had told me. I gave her numbers, dates, phrases. I described the signature that was not mine and the device whose purpose did not belong to ordinary life. I told her about the bridge and the blanket and the new smell of leather that covers the scent of something else entirely. She asked 3 questions. Precise. Kind. Then she told me to breathe. We do this right, she said. We build our own record. We gather and we wait. I am coming to you. Today. When the call ended, I looked at the clock. There was still time before the house filled with footsteps and the sound of a life performed. I washed my hands though they were clean. I changed the bedsheet in my room. I combed my hair with the attention of someone going to court. Then I sat in the chair by the window and watched the street until I saw a dusty blue sedan pull to the curb, and a woman with silver hair step out with the posture of a person who long ago decided that fear is allowed to sit in the car but not to touch the wheel. I stood to open the door. The hinges did not creak. Some things still remembered how to be graceful. Evelyn stepped through the doorway with the same calm she used to bring into a courtroom. Her eyes swept the hall once, registering the shine of the floor, the quiet of the house, the invisible tremor hiding underneath both. You look thinner, she said. And you look like you still win arguments, I replied. We hugged briefly, a gesture both real and practical. Then we moved to the kitchen where light pooled across the tiles. She placed her handbag on the counter, unzipped it, and drew out a notebook and a small recorder. The click of the button sounded almost ceremonial. Start from the beginning, she said. I told her. Slowly. Every word deliberate. Every pause measured. She listened the way doctors listen to a heart murmur. Attentive, expressionless. When I mentioned the policy amount, she wrote the number twice. When I described the forged signature, she underlined the word forged 3 times in silence. When I finished, she exhaled. They have built an efficient little plan, she said. But efficiency is not intelligence. We can use that. What do we do? First, she said, you stop reacting. Everything they see must look ordinary. You are still the gentle mother, the forgetful woman. That is the mask. Underneath we build evidence. She opened her notebook. You have photographs? I nodded and slid my phone across the table. She transferred each image to her drive, labeling them with tiny codes only she would understand. We record from now on, she continued. Every conversation, every phone call. If they mention the bridge, we keep it. If they change the pills, we document the label. We gather small truths until they can no longer deny the shape they make. Her calm steadied me more than comfort could have. For a moment I felt younger, back in the years when decisions came with purpose rather than fear. A car door slammed outside. The noise carved through our moment. Evelyn's eyes lifted. They're early, I whispered. She was already moving, closing the notebook, slipping the recorder into her sleeve. Then we begin sooner than planned, she said softly. I guided her to the living room and handed her the framed photograph of my husband. Pretend to be the friend who came to drop this off, I murmured. He would have wanted it returned. The key turned in the lock. Clara's voice entered first, sweet and bright. Mom? We forgot the grocery list. Evelyn smiled politely as they stepped in. You must be Clara, she said, tone pleasant, almost warm. I'm Evelyn Walsh, old friend of Zuri's. We taught together once upon a time. Clara blinked at the unexpected visitor. Ethan hovered behind her, keys in hand. I saw the quick calculation flicker through both of them, the rearranging of plans. How nice, Clara said. I didn't realize you still kept in touch. Oh yes, Evelyn said, examining the frame. She was my best reader. Always caught the part of the story people tried to hide. Something shifted in Clara's eyes. A tiny tightening. Evelyn's compliment had found its mark. Ethan cleared his throat. We were just heading out again. Long day ahead. Of course, Evelyn said easily. I'll keep her company. He nodded, uncertain, then turned toward the door. Clara hesitated. For a moment she looked directly at me. I held her gaze, neutral, polite, unreadable. Whatever she saw made her smile again too quickly. Don't tire Mom out, she said. I'll try not to, Evelyn replied. When the door shut behind them, we waited until the sound of the car faded. Only then did Evelyn let her smile drop. They are careful, she said. But not careful enough. The hesitation, that's guilt beginning to sweat. I sank into the chair. Do we call the police? Not yet. We let them tighten the knot themselves. The police prefer a finished picture. She tapped the notebook. Tomorrow I'll file a statement with timestamps. Quietly. Meanwhile, you behave as though nothing happened. Let them think their script is still intact. I nodded. It was strange how obedience could feel like strength when chosen. She poured us both water. When they mention the bridge again, keep your face still. When they tell you to drive, smile. You have one advantage they don't. What is that? They think they are writing the story. They forgot you taught the language. For the first time in weeks, laughter escaped me, small, rough, but alive. You still talk like a lawyer, I said. Habit, she said. Justice and grammar both depend on structure. We talked through the plan. Where to hide the recorder, how to store copies, what phrases to repeat if questioned. She would visit every few days under the pretense of helping me with estate planning. We would create a paper trail from their own lies. By the time she left, the afternoon light had turned gold. I walked her to the car. You think we can win? I asked quietly. Evelyn adjusted her glasses. This isn't about winning. It's about survival with witnesses. The car pulled away, leaving the faint scent of her perfume, bergamot and resolve. I watched until the taillights disappeared. Then I turned toward the house. It looked peaceful again, painted in late sunlight. A postcard of serenity pinned over a crime not yet committed. Inside I prepared tea. The ritual steadied me. I poured a cup for myself and another for no one. Across the table the empty chair waited like an audience. I imagined speaking aloud to my husband's ghost. They think they know how the story ends, I said. But you always told me I was terrible at endings. Outside, the sky darkened into the blue of ink before words. The first star blinked through, patient, impartial. I took a sip and let the bitterness settle. It tasted of courage disguised as routine. Later, before bed, I wrote in the journal again. Evelyn believes in evidence. I believe in timing. Between the two of us, we might build something that even fire cannot erase. When I closed the book, the house exhaled. Tomorrow they would come home cheerful, pretending nothing was out of place. I would smile back and pour tea, and every word we spoke would be a line in the evidence neither of them knew they were writing. The day Evelyn returned, the sky was the color of tin. Clouds pressed low over the sea, flattening the horizon into a line of steel. I stood on the porch waiting, teacup warm in my hands. When her car stopped in the driveway, the engine ticked once and fell silent. She stepped out wearing a dark coat and a calm that could hold a storm. "Morning," she said, her voice quiet enough to belong to the weather. Inside, I had already set the table with 2 cups and the small recorder hidden in the vase between them. Evelyn sat down without asking, eyes scanning the room. "They home?" "Not yet," I said. "They'll be here after lunch. Clara's out buying flowers for the front gate." "Lilies." "Of course she is," Evelyn murmured. "The polite kind of poison." I poured tea. "You sure about this?" She nodded. "If they believe you're fragile, we let them. They need to feel safe to show their hands." I took a sip, steadying myself. "So I act confused. Slow. Forgetful." "Yes. Not stupid, just blurred. Make them believe you're fading." That word, fading, slipped through me like smoke. I had spent my whole life trying to stay sharp, teaching others how to read what was unsaid. Now my best chance at survival was to pretend I couldn't even remember what I heard. We rehearsed quietly. The small gestures, the pauses, the way to let a spoon tremble just enough to draw pity but not suspicion. Evelyn adjusted my posture like a director fixing a scene. "If you drop something, don't bend too fast," she said. "Let them help. People who think they're rescuing you never watch your hands." When the sound of a car outside cut through the house, Evelyn gave me one last look. "Remember, kindness is your armor." I nodded, and she left through the back door, her steps swallowed by the gravel path. Clara entered humming the tune Sugar Sweet. She placed a bouquet on the table. "You like these, don't you?" "Beautiful," I said. "Are they for someone?" Her smile paused. For the house, Mom. You forget everything lately. I blinked slowly. Do I? She tilted her head, pleased with the performance she thought was hers alone. Yes, but that's all right. We'll take care of you. I smiled faintly. You already do. Her gaze softened in triumph. She reached out and patted my hand, the touch both gentle and claiming. Good girl, she said quietly, almost a whisper. The words should have burned, but I let them sink in. A teacher learns to keep a straight face even when a child writes nonsense on the board. Ethan arrived later, rain on his jacket, voice tired. Everything all right today? I think so, I said. Clara brought flowers. They're lilies, yes? He glanced at Clara. They shared a look that flickered too fast for comfort. Good, he said. We thought you might like something bright. Then he hesitated. Mom, do you remember where you put your driver's license? I frowned, feigning confusion. License. He sighed, as if speaking to a stubborn child. You'll need it tomorrow when we go for a drive. Oh, I said, blinking. The bridge again? Clara's tone sharpened. You remember that? Of course, I said softly. I never forget things that scare me. Ethan laughed nervously, the sound breaking too high. You'll be fine. I'll be with you. When they left the room, I exhaled. My hands trembled, but from restraint, not fear. I walked to the vase, pressed the recorder's button and whispered, both confirm tomorrow's drive. Mention bridge. Then I hit it again. That night I left my door ajar. Their voices carried down the hallway like a private radio. She's slipping faster than I thought, Clara said. Perfect timing. Ethan's voice dropped. I still think it's risky. You worry too much, she snapped. Once it's done, you'll thank me. She's my mother, Clara. She's a payout, Clara corrected. Don't start growing a conscience now. I lay there listening to the silence that followed, the kind that always comes after a line people can't take back. In the morning, Evelyn called. I've spoken to a contact, she said. ATF will monitor the car once we give them reason. Do exactly what they ask. Smile, drive, and hand them evidence. I told her I could do that. She said, good, because this time we finish it. The next day broke clear and bright. I wore my pale coat and the scarf my husband once gave me, the color of smoke after rain. Clara stood by the car door, all sweetness and patience. Ethan held the keys. Ready? He asked. I think so, I said. Just to the bridge? He nodded. Just to the bridge. As we drove, I watched their reflections in the window. Clara's smile was constant, thin as paper. Ethan's hands gripped the wheel too tightly. The wind outside rose. The water beneath the bridge shimmered silver blue. Halfway across, Clara turned to me. Do you ever think about Dad? She asked softly. Every day, I said. Especially when people try to make me forget him. Her eyes flickered, but she smiled again. He'd be proud of how we're taking care of you. I let out a small laugh that sounded like agreement and looked out the window. I could see the inspection van parked near the far end of the bridge, white and anonymous. Evelyn had arranged that. Ethan slowed. Strange, he muttered. Looks like maintenance. Clara's voice tightened. Just keep driving. I looked at the rearview mirror and met Ethan's eyes. It's fine, I said. Let them work. I'll stay in the car. He hesitated, then pulled over beside the guardrail. Wait here, he said. We'll check. They stepped out together, walking toward the men in reflective vests. One of the workers pointed to the SUV. His gesture casual. The moment stretched. Then the officer lifted the hood. Ethan froze. Clara said something sharp. Two more officers stepped forward. The scene unfolded with the slow inevitability of grammar. When they turned back, Clara's face was pale, fury cutting through the mask. What did you do? She hissed. Nothing, I said. You told me to drive. The officers approached the car. One of them leaned down to my window. Mrs. Horton? Please stay seated. We found something unusual in your vehicle. I nodded calmly. You'll want to speak to my lawyer. Evelyn Walsh. He blinked. Yes, ma'am. She's the one who called us. Behind him, Clara's voice rose. Ethan tried to calm her, but it was too late. The words she shouted became the confession she had worked so hard to hide. You think you can trap me, you stupid old witch. Her voice carried across the bridge, caught by the wind and the microphones both. I closed my eyes. The sea smelled clean that day. When it was over, one of the officers opened my door and helped me out. You're safe now, he said. Safe. The word felt foreign, like a language I used to know. Evelyn's car arrived minutes later. She moved through the chaos with quiet authority, guiding me toward her. It's done, she whispered. They'll handle the rest. I nodded. I didn't burn. She smiled faintly. No, you didn't. We watched together as Clara and Ethan were led away, two dark shapes swallowed by flashing lights. The bridge gleamed in the sun, innocent as a polished blade. That night at Evelyn's apartment, the news reported a prevented insurance fraud and an attempted homicide under investigation. My name was mentioned once briefly, then replaced by footage of the car being towed, its hood open, its secrets exposed. Evelyn turned off the television. You did well. I followed instructions, I said. That's what doing well looks like. Outside, the sky burned gold before fading into evening. The ocean beyond the window caught the light and threw it back. I held the cup of tea she gave me and let the steam warm my face. My reflection wavered in the surface, clear and alive. For the first time in months, I did not flinch when I looked at myself. Before sleeping, I wrote in my journal. The fire they planned never came. But something else burned instead. The lie, the silence, the obedience. I survived not by running but by listening. The house forgot me, but the world remembered. I closed the book, placed it on the nightstand and turned off the light. The darkness felt clean earned. Outside, the sea moved, slow and endless, whispering to itself the story I had rewritten. One where the victim learned to stay very quiet until the moment came to speak, and her voice was the match that lit the truth. The day after the bridge, morning arrived without negotiation. I woke in Evelyn's spare room, a square of light falling across the blanket like a quiet blessing. For a moment I lay still and listened. No footsteps in the hallway. No careful voices practicing kindness. Only a kettle beginning to murmur in the kitchen, and the hum of the city beyond the window. Safety, I discovered, is not silence. It is the freedom to hear ordinary sounds and know they are not lies. Evelyn was already dressed, hair pinned back, glasses low on her nose. Papers waited on the table in patient stacks. She handed me tea and a slice of toast cut into triangles, the way mothers do for children. I smiled at the shape of care that does not pretend to be anything else. We begin the long work, she said. What does that look like? Phone calls. Statements. Chain of custody. Then we let the machine roll. She gave me a thin folder. This is your statement as you told it. We will add the recordings, the photographs, the timestamps from the bridge. ATF cataloged the device and seized the car. Digital forensics already pulled the app logs. Clara's phone will do the rest. I ran my fingers along the folder's edge. The skin there felt new, as if the night had given me back something I did not know I had lost. Will they come here? I asked. Not to you. To me, yes. To them today. Evelyn's mouth made a shape like a small storm that had already decided where to rain. They will push. That is their job. We will not. The knock came mid-morning. Two agents entered with polite faces and restless hands. They asked for details I had already given. They asked again differently to see if the story would change. It did not. They examined the recorder, the phone, the copies with dates written in the corner in my own steady hand. One of them asked how long I had been a teacher. When I told him, he said his mother had been one. He touched the edge of his notebook with a respect he did not try to hide. By noon they were gone, leaving behind the scent of rain and ink. Evelyn watched their car pull away, then turned to me with a look I had seen once on her face when we were young and poor and certain of nothing except that the truth could be shaped if you held it long enough. Now we wait, she said. Waiting is part of winning. We did not wait in idleness. She phoned the clerk's office and began the paperwork that would reclaim my name from the mess they had wrapped it in. I wrote letters to the bank and to the insurance company, each line simple, each sentence precise. I felt like I was wiping soot from a window pane until the glass remembered how to be clear. In the afternoon she took me to the safe house near the river. A one-bedroom apartment with a view of water, and a small desk by the window. The drawers were empty except for a stack of clean paper and a single pen. The place smelled faintly of soap and old paint. The floor was plain, the walls plain, the light honest. I stood in the middle of the room and breathed. "You will stay here for a while," Evelyn said. "Let them try to explain their way out without you near enough to frighten them with the truth of your face." I laughed at that, small and surprised. "Does my face do that?" "It does now," she said. I unpacked what little I had. A photograph. The journal. The soft scarf that still held the ghost of my husband's aftershave. I set the kettle on and watched steam drift like a forgiving thought. Somewhere outside, a tugboat moved along the channel, a shape pushing water forward with patient insistence. News reached us before evening. A headline on local television. A picture of the SUV with its hood open like a confession. Words slid across the screen. Attempted homicide under investigation. Ignition device recovered. Suspects detained for questioning. I did not feel triumph. Triumph belongs to game winners, and I have no taste for games. What I felt was a careful sort of relief, the kind that sits on a chair and folds its hands and says, "We are not done, but we are closer." Evelyn shut off the television and poured more tea. "Keep eating," she said, placing a bowl of soup in front of me. "You cannot build a future on an empty stomach." We ate without talking. When the bowls were clean, she took out a second folder. "Tomorrow, the detective will ask if you want to attend the search of your house. I advise against it. Let the evidence speak while you stay where memory cannot be used against you." "I trust you," I said. "Good. Then sleep. I will stay on the sofa." I lay awake for a long time in the soft dark, listening to the river. My mind played the scenes again. The bridge. The officers. Clara's voice breaking into pieces that cut only her. Ethan's face caught between habit and horror. People will say later that they do not know how such things happen. I know. They happen one small permission at a time. I must have slept because I woke to a phone ringing. The hour was early and the light was the color of milk. Evelyn answered. She listened. She said thank you. She hung up and her face softened. "They found the app on her phone," she said. "They traced the purchase to the email we saw. Activation logs match the time you were meant to drive last week. The route to the bridge is stored. Timing set to 8 minutes, 50 seconds after ignition. They also pulled the policy application from a laptop at the house. The signature file they used is built from scans of your old letters. They layered your loops into a composite until the machine believed you." The forensic analyst was almost impressed. I sat with that for a moment. My love letters and permission slips and late-night notes had been used to make a lie wear my face. There was a tenderness in the violation that made me ache. "Will there be a trial?" I asked. "There will," she said. "Not today, but soon enough." She set a small recorder on the table between us. "I want you to tell the story once more. Not for them, for you. Speak it as a record to yourself, and when it is done we will put it away." I did. I spoke the beginning in a voice that did not break. The hallway. The cup. The sentence that drew the map. I spoke the middle without apology. The folder. The signature that looked like mine and did not belong to me. I spoke the bridge and the wind and the officers with their firm hands and kind eyes. When I finished, the room felt larger, as if words had cleared space where fear had been stored. Evelyn clicked the button to stop the recording. "Good," she said again, the word shaped like a benediction. Late that afternoon the detective called. He offered updates in a voice careful not to lean too far in either direction. Both suspects were in custody. Both had spoken quickly at first and then asked for lawyers. The device was in evidence. The car was impounded. A judge would hear a request for a protective order on my behalf. He asked if I needed anything. "Yes," I said. "I need a small sign made of wood with a short sentence carved into it." There was a pause. Then a slow smile in his voice. "I will recommend a carpenter I trust." We hung up. Evelyn looked at me. "A sign," she said. "What will it say?" "I am not sure yet," I answered, though the words were already forming at the back of my throat like a tide getting ready to speak. Evening returned with the color of old coins. I walked down to the river path while Evelyn finished her calls. The wind lifted my hair. Across the water a boy in a red jacket threw bread to gulls that did not need charity but took it anyway. I sat on a bench and counted the boats. 1 barge. 2 fishing boats. A little white craft that moved as if lost and then found its way. People passed me in pairs. A woman laughed in a way that made other people smile. I realized I had not heard that sound in my house for a long time. On my way back, a cat stepped out from under a fence and looked at me with the unbothered judgment cats carry like a second tail. I greeted it and it blinked slowly as if to say you again and returned to its business. In the apartment, I wrote a list on a piece of paper. Nothing dramatic. Eggs. Soap. Stamps. On the bottom line, I wrote the name of a book I wanted to reread. A book about a woman who refuses to be reduced to a cautionary tale. The next morning, we met with a victim advocate at the courthouse. The building smelled of paper and winter. She had the kind of face that makes people cry and confess. I did neither. I shook her hand and thanked her for explaining each step. She gave me a card with a number to call if I could not sleep. I put it in my pocket as if adding a small stone to a jar I would one day call strength. From there we were escorted to a room where I watched through glass as officers cataloged the contents of the brown folder from the study. They named each item as if baptizing it. The policy. The email printouts. The receipt for the device. The draft letter where my gratitude had been forged to serve someone else's hunger. With each label attached, I felt the world tilt back 1 degree toward level. Do you want to see them? The detective asked later. They will be brought through this corridor. I looked at the closed door and at my hands. No, I said. I have seen enough of them. He nodded as if relieved. Wise. On our way out, a young officer approached. He was the kind of young that believes in rules because he has not yet seen how people bend them. He cleared his throat. Ma'am, he said. My grandmother raised me. I am sorry for what they tried to do. I thanked him. After he left, Evelyn squeezed my arm gently and did not speak for a long time. Silence, when used correctly, is a bridge you build for someone else to cross. At night I stood by the apartment window and watched the river turn itself into darkness. Across the way lights came on one by one in buildings that looked like staircases lying on their sides. My reflection floated over the scene. I lifted my hand and my reflection lifted hers. As if we were practicing a language that took a lifetime to learn. I lay down with the window cracked open. The room filled with river air and the faint sound of traffic. I thought of the car that had been meant to hold a fire, and of the bridge that would have framed it for the world. I pictured both drained of power. Nothing but metal and line. That image soothed me. I slept without dreams. In the morning, Evelyn placed a newspaper on the table. The article was small, not the top story but not hidden. The words were careful. The photo blurred the faces of strangers who were not strangers. It mentioned my age without guessing at my soul. It mentioned the device without speculating on how often such things are used. It said investigation continues. I folded the paper and set it aside. Next comes the arraignment, Evelyn said. Then dates we will memorize and forget and memorize again. This is the long part. It is also the honest part. I nodded. If honesty is long, I can live with that. She smiled. I know. We made oatmeal and ate it with the same seriousness other people save for ceremonies. After breakfast, she handed me a form and a pen. Your statement about the deed, she said. We will ask the court to consider undue influence. You will reclaim what can be reclaimed. I signed my name once. Slowly. Then again. Then a third time for a witness. Each curve of ink was a muscle remembering itself. When we finished, she closed the folder with a clean snap. That is enough for today. I walked back to the window. The river moved as it always had, pretending not to notice us. In that moment I understood that the opposite of fire is not water as the poem said. For me the opposite of fire is paperwork and patience and the stubborn dignity of staying to see the end. I turned to Evelyn. Tomorrow, I said, we buy a small wooden sign. And what will we carve into it? She asked. I thought of the hallway and the cup and the way a voice can turn a person into a number on a page. I thought of the bridge gleaming and the blanket folded in the back seat, and the way truth steps forward when it is finally called by its name. I will tell you after the hearing, I said. Words choose their moment. She accepted that as if it were law. In her world and mine, sometimes it is. The first hearing came 2 weeks later. Evelyn drove us in her quiet car that smelled faintly of leather and peppermint. The courthouse stood pale against the winter light, its steps slick from rain. I walked beside her, slow but steady. No reporters yet, only the rustle of paperwork and the echo of shoes in marble corridors. Inside, the air tasted of cold coffee and old paper. Officers nodded as we passed, their expressions careful. I realized how strange it was to become a story other people had already read summaries of. They thought they knew my beginning, my motive, my survival. But the middle of any story is never public. It belongs only to those who lived through it. Ethan and Clara were brought in through another door. I saw them through the glass partition, two figures diminished by fluorescent light. Clara looked smaller. Her confidence dissolved into the blank stare of someone trying to rewrite reality. Ethan's shoulders sagged as if his spine had been replaced by apology. For a heartbeat our eyes met. He looked away first. The judge entered, gavel light against wood. Formal words were spoken, names recited, charges read. Attempted homicide, fraud, forgery, conspiracy. Each syllable fell like a stone dropped into still water. Clara flinched only once when they mentioned the ignition device. Her lips moved, forming a word I couldn't hear. Maybe my name. Maybe regret. I sat still. Evelyn's hand rested on mine under the table, grounding me like a lighthouse in fog. The prosecution presented the evidence. Photographs, logs, the policy papers, the forged signature. My name appeared again and again, black ink reclaiming itself from their plans. When they played Clara's voice from the bridge, "You think you can trap me, you stupid old witch," the courtroom went silent. Even the stenographer paused a second before typing again. The defense asked for bail. The judge refused. Hearing adjourned. Evelyn and I walked out into thin sunlight. Reporters waited now, microphones like bright spears. One woman shouted a question. "Do you feel vindicated, Mrs. Horton?" I kept walking. Vindication belongs to those who wanted revenge. What I wanted was air that didn't smell of gasoline. That evening we sat by the river again. Evelyn read from a book, her voice steady. I watched the reflection of lights tremble across the water. "Do you ever think," I asked, "that people like them don't start as monsters?" She closed the book softly. "Of course. Monsters are built from justification stacked too high to climb back down." I thought of Ethan's voice, of the years I had spent raising a boy who once brought me shells from the beach because he said they sounded like the ocean when I missed it. I wondered what part of him Clara had touched to make him forget the difference between love and ownership. Evelyn touched my arm. "You are allowed to grieve what you lost, even if what you lost tried to kill you." Her words landed somewhere deep. Grief, I realized, is not only for the dead. It also belongs to the living versions of people who no longer exist. Weeks passed. The world kept its rhythm. Every morning I walked along the pier, bought coffee from the same vendor, nodded to the same old couple feeding pigeons. Some days I almost forgot the shape of fear. Other days it waited for me in reflections, in a parked car's mirror, in a sudden phone ring, in the smell of engine oil. But I learned to let fear walk beside me instead of ahead. Evelyn kept the updates coming in quiet doses. The trial would take months. The insurance company had frozen the policy. Ethan's lawyer had requested psychological evaluation. Clara's team argued coercion. None of it changed the truth. One afternoon a package arrived for me. No return address, only my name written in unfamiliar handwriting. Inside, wrapped in newspaper, was a small carved piece of wood. A sign. The letters burned into it read, "Still here." I traced the grooves with my finger, felt the roughness, the sincerity. Evelyn found me staring at it. "The carpenter," she said, smiling. "He delivered what you ordered." I nodded. "It's perfect." We nailed it to the wall near the window. When light hit the letters, the shadow beneath them spelled endurance. Spring crept in quietly. The river grew busier. Tourists returned. Flowers appeared in markets, chaotic and alive. I went to therapy once a week, learned to let memory speak without trembling. Some nights I still dreamt of fire, not flames but the idea of combustion, of everything breaking apart at once. Each morning I woke before the alarm and watched the light climb the walls until it felt safe to move again. On the day of the verdict, I did not go to court. I stayed home. Evelyn called when it was over. "Guilty on all counts," she said. "Sentencing next month." I closed my eyes. And Ethan? He took a plea deal. Testified against her. 10 years. I thanked her, though the words felt like pebbles in my mouth. After the call, I went outside. The air smelled of salt and violets. I walked to the edge of the pier where the water licked the stones. Somewhere a child laughed. Somewhere a gull screamed. The world, indifferent and merciful, kept turning. That evening, I sat with my journal and wrote without stopping. The fire never came. It lived in their plan, not in the world. They built it from greed and calculation and the mistaken belief that I had forgotten what survival sounds like. But the body remembers. The mind listens. The voice waits. I was never the match, only the silence before the strike. And silence, used wisely, is its own flame. When I finished, I closed the notebook and set it beside the "Still Here" sign. The two objects looked like bookends of a story that had learned to end itself. Evelyn called from the kitchen, asking if I wanted tea. "Yes," I said, smiling. "But this time let's make it strong." She laughed, and the sound filled the small apartment like sunlight after rain. We drank in silence, content. The river outside shimmered. Somewhere across the water, fireworks from a festival began, brief flowers of light blooming and dying against the night sky. I watched them without fear. The world had burned and survived. So had I. Morning came with the smell of coffee and rain. The world outside was new again, washed clean, edges soft with mist. I stood by the window of Evelyn's apartment, watching droplets slide down the glass in thin parallel lines. They looked like paths, all leading downward but somehow still beautiful. Evelyn was reading at the table, her glasses low, a pencil between her fingers. "You're awake early," she said without looking up. "I dreamt I was walking," I replied. "Not away from something. Just walking." "That's progress," she said, smiling. "When the body starts dreaming of movement, the heart has already forgiven the ground." Forgiven, such a tender word for something that used to feel impossible. I poured myself coffee, added milk, stirred it until the color matched the sky. My reflection floated briefly in the cup, older but softer. Not the face of a victim, nor the ghost of a mother lost inside her own house. Just a woman who had earned her own name again. It had been 6 months since the verdict. The trial ended, the reporters moved on, and the town learned to say my story in past tense. "That woman who survived," they'd whisper in cafes. I let them whisper. Survival is not a trophy. It's a quiet kind of defiance that doesn't need an audience. Ethan had written once from prison. The letter was short, apologetic in the way guilt often is when it no longer matters. He said he didn't understand how it had gone so far. That he had let Clara lead him. That he missed the sound of the sea. I read it once, then folded it neatly and placed it inside the brown folder that had started everything. The folder no longer scared me. It was just paper now, the remains of a failed story that tried to erase me and failed. Clara never wrote. I didn't expect her to. Some people live forever inside the walls they build. I rented a small house by the shore 2 towns away. White walls, blue shutters, a porch facing the horizon. The air smelled like salt and wildflowers. Every evening I walked barefoot on the sand, letting the waves erase my footprints before I looked back. The townspeople were kind in that gentle, distant way small communities are. They called me Mrs. Horton, though sometimes I asked them to call me Zuri. I told them I used to teach literature, and soon a few local children began to visit after school for lessons. They'd bring books, sit cross-legged on the porch, and read aloud until the sun leaned low. One of them, a shy girl named Leah, once asked, "Why do you always smile at the sad parts?" "Because the sad parts are honest," I said. "And honest things deserve to be seen." She nodded, as if she understood completely. Maybe she did. Children often understand before they learn to explain. Evelyn visited often. She claimed it was for the air, but I knew she came to make sure I kept living rather than just surviving. She brought newspapers, small gifts, new pens. "You should write again," she told me one afternoon. "Not just reports or statements. A book. The story from your eyes." I laughed softly. Who would want to read about an old woman who almost burned? "Everyone," she said. "Because everyone has a fire they survived." I thought about that long after she left. That night, under the lamp's steady glow, I opened a fresh notebook and wrote the first sentence. The fire never came, but I learned to live with its light. The words looked strange at first, too calm, too composed, but the more I read them, the more they sounded like truth. I wrote until the moon dipped behind the clouds and the room smelled of ink and ocean. Summer arrived early that year. The days stretched long and kind. I tended a small garden behind the house, tomatoes, herbs, a stubborn lemon tree that refused to die. I learned to cook again, to dance slowly in the kitchen with the radio low. Sometimes when I looked at the "Still Here" sign on my wall, I caught myself smiling without meaning to. Visitors came less often and I preferred it that way. Solitude had become an ally, not a punishment. I found new rituals: watering plants at dawn, reading before bed, writing small letters to no one. Letters to the self I used to be, the teacher, the wife, the woman who forgot that silence could be power. I never sent them. They didn't need to go anywhere. Some words exist only to remind you that you still have a voice. On the first anniversary of the bridge, Evelyn and I returned there. The water below was calm, the air sharp and clean. We stood side by side, leaning against the rail. The wind played with our hair like a hand that remembered affection. "Do you ever think about that day?" she asked. "Every day," I said. "But not the way I used to. I don't see the fear anymore. I see the pause, the moment before everything changed. It's like the world took a deep breath and decided to keep me." She nodded slowly. "Then it was worth it." I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small wooden charm. A piece carved from the same wood as the sign. I dropped it into the sea. It floated once, caught the sunlight, and disappeared. Evelyn watched it go. "A goodbye." "A thank you," I said. We stayed until the light softened, until the bridge behind us looked less like a memory, and more like a line on a map we had already crossed. That night, back at my house, I sat by the window and looked out at the stars. The sea murmured below, endless and familiar. I thought of my husband's old truck, of the music that used to pour from its radio, of Ethan's laugh before it turned brittle, of the young teacher I once was, believing stories were just lessons on paper. Now I knew better. Stories are maps. They show where we have been, warn us of the cliffs, and whisper that sometimes the way forward is not straight but patient. I wrote one final entry in my journal: "To survive is not to win. It is to wake up each day and choose gentleness over fear. It is to look at the past and see not a wound, but a seam, proof that something was broken and then repaired. I am Zuri Horton. I was almost erased and now I am written again." I closed the book, turned off the light, and let the sea sing me to sleep. Outside, dawn waited somewhere beyond the horizon, steady and sure, ready to begin again.